We have our latest update on the Tom Girardi trial, and what an update it is. Huge stunner. Yesterday, Tom Girardi takes the stand in his own defense, which we've been saying would be a bad idea, but we also have been saying we think that Tom Girardi probably could not help himself. He had to talk to this jury, and so he got up there and he did talk to this jury. Stewart, what are your thoughts? What did he say? Are you convinced by his testimony?
Well, I'm not convinced by his testimony, but what he did was he did the Hail Mary pass. He had to. In his mind, he's got to build sympathy from this jury, and that's the only way he's going to get out of this. And so he gets up and basically just, in my mind, contradicts all of the evidence of all of the witnesses who have previously testified that they did not get their money. He states that everybody got every penny they were entitled to. And then, of course, all of a sudden, when on cross-examination, we learned that, well, there were holdbacks, but there were holdbacks for various reasons. Medical vendors had to be paid off. Well, that's a reasonable holdback, but that's not really a holdback. That's just you giving the client a breakdown of the costs of the case, letting them know you're going to apply whatever they ultimately ended up with against those costs, and then the rest of the money is to go to them, and it's supposed to happen really quickly. It's not something that's supposed to be held back. And Girardi testifies that on the Rui Gomez issue that the mom had told him, oh, don't give the money to my son because he's a drug addict. He's got a drug addiction. The mom contradicted that earlier in her testimony. And the son also says, I was never notified that any money was being withheld. There's also the small mathematical error where Mr. Girardi told the Rui Gomez family they got $5 million when they got like $55 million. So there's
a very small mathematical error there. Yes.
You carry the one. You know, it's tough. Lawyers aren't good at math. But what were your thoughts? First of all, I'm not shocked, I guess, because everyone says it's a shocker he gets up there. But look, this is his Hail Mary pass, and he's got to get sympathy with this jury. In fact, the article goes on to say when he would answer his questions yesterday, he would turn and look directly at the jury and talk to them. And that's very much what a plaintiff lawyer does in closing statement and opening statement and so forth. So he's trying to connect with this jury. But what were your thoughts, Keith?
Well, first of all, I thought it wasn't a good idea for him to testify because I think it blows out of the water the defense's argument that Tom Girardi lacks capacity. It sounded like he had enough capacity to be able to answer questions that were beneficial to him, certainly. And so this whole idea that, oh, we lack capacity, he doesn't know what's going on, I think that largely went out of the window based on just him getting up and testifying. I also feel like he had really kind of no choice. There really was no good defense evidence that was going to exonerate him in this case, that was going to show that these things didn't happen, or maybe they were just a mistake or a misunderstanding. And so he kind of had to get up there and say something. It was his only chance, and it was really the Hail Mary. But let's talk about some of the specific things that he said, because in particular, he told the jury, well, I never took a salary. So for all these years, 10 years, he never took a salary because he cared about his clients and he wanted the money to go to his clients and to his wonderful employees. It's just kind of hard to wrap your mind around that when you see testimony of $69 million going out for vacations and luxury cars and homes and $21.7 million going to EJ Global for Erica Jane. I mean, never took a salary. Are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, he may technically be correct, Keith. You and I started this firm in January 1 of 2008, and we've never taken a salary, right? And that's a very technical term, but we've taken partner draws. We've been given money as owners of the company, so we're not technically taking a salary. So is he playing a word game there? Is he saying, well, I never took a salary? Or is it what you just said? Basically, the firm was his own piggy bank, and it paid for his whole lifestyle and everything. And if that's the case, well, there's accounting issues, there's IRS issues, there's franchise tax board issues. So this idea that I never took a salary, is that simply a way to confuse this jury? No. I mean, this guy clearly ended up with the lion's share of the money, even during a time when they said that he didn't have the ability to appreciate and understand that.
Yeah, and I think it's that sort of testimony that could anger the jury even and say, this guy's, ridiculous. But he also talked about Cayman, and he said, I didn't know Cayman was stealing. Cayman was very clever in the way that he stole. And if I had found out, I would have been very upset. I would have just, gotten mad and gone crazy. And he literally said that. I would have gone crazy.
Yeah.
So What do you think of that? Were you convinced about that?
Oh, well, I mean, no, because the testimony, again, he's contradicting previous testimony from other people that said he was in control of everything, knew everything, understood how the firm worked. He was in charge of signing out the trust account checks. So it doesn't make sense to me that, of course, this falls into the theory that the defense has, and that is that Christopher Kamen is the bad actor here and not Tom Girardi. But as we've stated previously, Christopher Kamen could be a bad actor here, and Tom Girardi could also be a bad actor here. So I'm not convinced on him saying I had no idea what was going on. I mean, this is probably the number one personal injury attorney in the early 90s and the early 2000s. He kind of shaped the industry. Many young lawyers looked up to him, followed his footsteps. I have a hard time believing he had no idea what was going on at his firm from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, especially with those kind of numbers. Now, his defense attorney did try to show that he had a little bit of incapacity when the defense attorney asked him, who am I? And of course, Tom Girardi goes, I don't know who you are. You bad, mean, terrible. It's one of those things. And this is his own lawyer that he's talking to. And so I think that was their attempt to show that Girardi doesn't really know what's going on.
Well, it could be. The thing that jumped out at me were several things. First of all, he was asked on cross-examination, would it be okay to take the money from the firm away from clients that deserved it and give it to his wife, Erica Jane, in her attempted career at being a singer or whatever it was she was trying to do. And Tom Girardi said, no, that would be wrong. So he knows the difference between right and wrong. And that's something that a patient that is fully demented is at the end of that dementia graph, they wouldn't be able to appreciate that distinction. He also seemed to understand a little bit of humor yesterday, and humor is one of the first things that goes on dementia and Alzheimer's patients. And the reason humor goes away is because you kind of have to read into humor. It's something that you have to look into. Like when somebody's being sarcastic and you know they're being sarcastic, that's something that a dementia patient has a hard time picking up on. And humor is the same way. And the humor he picked up on was the cross-examiner asked him, on cross-examination asked him, are you the best lawyer on the planet, essentially?
Yeah.
And Girardi says, well, thank you for the compliment.
Yeah.
So he understands there's some, there's a little bit of funniness there, tongue in cheek. That's not something that most dementia patients understand.
And at some point, his attorney said, are you ready for the next question? And Girardi said, well, depends. What's the next question? I mean, that shows, a higher level functioning.
Well, and he also asked the prosecutor to be nice to him multiple times. So he knows that this is the person that's not going to be nice to him. And so why does he know that? Because he knows they're going to ask him about things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah, and when he said, you have to be nice to me, it's the same thing that Tom Girardi used to say to his clients and these other attorneys that were going after him. I found that a little bit galling. It's a little bit in your face to say, you have to be nice to me. I mean, really? Right now? Let's talk about the holdback. So Girardi's claiming that he held money back from Rui Gomez and other clients for any number of reasons because of, they were drug addicts or they were going through divorce or, like you mentioned, medical liens. When can a lawyer hold back client money? So if a client's entitled to something, and I'm not talking about legitimate costs. I mean, a medical lien would be a legitimate cost. You have to set aside for the cost. But when can we just take client money and of our own thoughts just say, well, this person isn't going to do well with this money. This person's going to spend this money on drugs, and therefore we're going to hold it back?
The answer is simple: never. If a client is entitled to money, you must get it to them, and it must be done in short order. If there is let's say a client calls you up and disputes let's say Tom Girardi earns a 33% contingency fee on a $100,000 case. So the math is easy. He's entitled to $33,000, right? So he gets the whole $100,000 in. If the client says, oh, I don't want to pay you anymore, send me the whole 100, Mr. Girardi would not have to do that. Any lawyer would not have to do that. They could take the 33% that they're owed, leave it in trust, not take it into their operating account. But then the balance of the money, they've got to give that to their client immediately because those are not disputed funds. So if there are some disputed funds, you got to leave them in your trust account, and then you have to do the arbitration before a county bar, or you have to go to superior court or whatever to resolve the matter between your client and yourself to see who's entitled to that holdback of that 33% that is in your trust account, which you have not taken into your operating account. You've not taken it and given it to yourself. You're holding that in reserve. And that would be an appropriate thing to do if you have a claim to it, a valid claim to it. You better have a valid claim to it as a lawyer, because if we learn that you don't have a valid claim to it, you're now holding a client's money that you're not entitled to do.
Yeah, and that's just the part that arguably belongs to the attorney. You can never hold back client money. So if you're representing Mr. Rui Gomez and his mother calls you and says, he's got a drug problem, don't distribute the money to him, what do?
Well, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, who's the client? And it sounds like with Rui Gomez, I think mom was a client, dad was a client, and son was a client. Well, you owe a fiduciary obligation to all three of them. And if one client comes to you and tells you something negative about the other client, you really have to withdraw from representation at some point, because you can't be in an actual conflict with your clients. But again, this is a self-serving statement by Mr. Girardi yesterday that he was trying to benefit his client who had a drug problem. No, the son never asked for, or was never informed that Mr. Girardi was going to do this holdback. And the mother says, I never asked him to do that. And so, boy, when you get multiple people saying something, and then Tom Girardi, which the evidence appears he did take money, the evidence appears he took money that he wasn't entitled to, and now he's making these self-serving statements. It's a day late and $1 short.
Yeah, it really is. And it doesn't absolve him of anything, because as lawyers, we're not allowed to just decide to hold back client money because we think it's what's best for the client. The client decides. If the client instructs us to give them money, we give them. If the client instructs us to hold it in the trust account, we hold it. That's all up to the client to decide, not for us. We are not the kings of the world. We're going to come in and decide, well, you're foolish with money, and therefore I've decided that I'm going to hold on to your money.
Yeah, something else that kind of struck me was that apparently he would do holdbacks for family law matters. And I'm not sure that's entirely appropriate, because the clients are directing you not to give them money that they're entitled to. I don't know what you do. That's something you may have to call the state bar hotline and get their 2 cents on how to handle that, because you don't want to harm your client. But on the other hand, you don't want to be involved in keeping money away from a client so that they can keep money away from a spouse they're divorcing, or money away from the IRS, the Franchise Tax Board, or something like that. That's something you have to be careful with.
Yeah. And then Tom Girardi also denied that he lied about the amount of the settlement to Rui Gomez. He told Rui Gomez $5 million. It was actually $52 million.
Right.
So, and I think that's in emails. There's actually emails about that. Tom Girardi also tried to distance himself from a lot of these cases, saying, I didn't work on them. I don't know who worked on them. I don't know the details about it. But on the other hand, he also knew, precisely that Rui Gomez's mother told me to keep the money because he's a drug addict, and that I remember, and I swear under penalty of perjury that happened. And so it's kind of interesting that he remembers precisely some things, but then on all these other things, I don't know anything about it. I don't remember it. I don't know what happened with it.
Yeah, and you point out you're not overstating it. He literally said to the jury several times, "I swear under penalty of perjury." It kind of reminds me of the person that I'm taking a deposition of, and I can see that they're lying to me over and over again. They preface every sentence with, "Well, let me be honest with you,"
right?
And then everything that follows from that, they're not being honest with you. So if you have to say, "Hey, let me be honest with you," why not just say what it is you're going to say? Right. Because we're presuming that you're going to be honest with us.
Yeah. And then, like you said, he claimed that every client got every penny that every client was supposed to get. Every single client, and I swear to you, got every, that's again going back to, right. And I swear to you, got every single penny that they were supposed to get.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of hard to imagine, because a lot of his emails and communications were him making excuses as to why the money couldn't be given out. So for him to say that every client got every penny, I just don't get it. I don't see it.
Yeah, well, and then it also, you're probably going to get into this a little bit, but there's an attorney that worked with Girardi and Keese in the past. His name was Jeff Isaacs, and he was involved in a mass tort on the therapy drug Prempro. And this was a 2014 lawsuit. I'm sorry, this was a 2011 settlement for Prempro, where money came in, and Isaacs and his clients are owed money from this settlement from Girardi, and they don't get it. And so Isaacs finally, 3 years later in 2014, files a lawsuit. And after he files the lawsuit, the case does settle, and he says, look, my clients finally did get their money. I don't know where they got it from, but they finally did get their money. So at least in that regard, I guess Girardi was correct on that point, that those people did get every penny that they were entitled to, but he leaves out the fact that Mr. Isaacs had to file a lawsuit on behalf of his clients 3 years after the settlement, And then there was a settlement, and we don't know what the contents of that settlement were. Was it dollar for dollar? Did everybody get what they were fully entitled to? Or was there some trimming off the top because it's a settlement?
Yeah, and Isaacs also said that I don't know where the money came from. So for all we know, that they were paid with other client money that came in, we don't know. Isaacs also pointed out that nobody at Girardi and Keese blamed Kamen or Girardi's cognitive decline for their failure to make these payments. So that just shows you that back in 2014 and those, 15, all those years, nobody was saying Tom Girardi lacked capacity then. They're only saying it now. And the testimony that we've seen only shows maybe possible cognitive decline in 2019, 2020. Never anything that goes back, further than that by and large.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal, because if it was his cognitive decline all the way back to 2011, 13, 14, that would be something that you would think would have been brought up at that time. And then, of course, Christopher Kamen is, I guess at that time, I don't know if he's met his girlfriend yet, but he's spending money apparently. And again, he's a bad actor, it looks like, and his trial is next year. We'll learn more about that next year. But just because Christopher Kamen is bad does not mean Tom Girardi is good. And
right.
So that's one of the problems with his defense.
And the defense attorneys got up and asked Isaacs, well, were criminal charges ever filed, on the case that you handled? And he said, no, they were not filed to my knowledge. I don't know that means a whole lot either. I mean, the fact that there weren't charges filed before, but they're filed now, who cares?
Well, and ultimately it sounds like Girardi sent money to them based upon the 2014 lawsuit. So there must have been some merit to it.
Yeah, there must have been. The interesting thing, at the end of the day, the judge did read jury instructions to the jury. That was read yesterday because closing arguments are going to be next Monday. Court is dark today. And she did point out that what the duties were for a lawyer. So lawyers have fiduciary duties to keep our clients informed and to maintain trust accounts. And apparently part of the instructions was a lawyer can violate the ethical obligations. That's not necessarily sufficient to hold them liable for a crime. So criminal culpability is different from doing something that's unethical. And so I thought that was an interesting jury instruction to lay out there. And I think that if the jury does end up finding Tom Girardi guilty, that type of instruction is going to be helpful to maintain that conviction if this case goes on appeal, which there's a good chance it would. What were your thoughts on that jury instruction?
I think that judges and juries tend to make decisions from their gut, and then they back into the law. And here the jury instructions are the law. The judge does their best to educate. Non-lawyers generally are on juries. Sometimes lawyers end up on juries, but mostly jurors are made up of non-lawyers. And so there's these jury instructions that are read to the jury to educate them on the law and how it applies. And then they take the facts that they've heard in the case and they use the jury instructions as kind of their guide in coming to a determination, a decision. And so people, in my experience, they make a gut reaction that either Tom Girardi is good or bad. And once they make that gut reaction, then they look at the jury instructions, follow them, figure out how to follow them, and come to a resolution or a determination. The same would be true if somebody thought Tom Girardi was being taken advantage of and that he did lack mental capacity, and that probably the real bad actor here is Christopher Kamen. So if somebody is persuaded of the defense's view of this case, then they will back into the jury instructions once they have that gut reaction. So I think the jury instructions can say a lot of things. Ultimately, people hear facts. And I think, again, juries tend to get this stuff right. 99% of the time, a jury will get the right result. Every once in a while, you get a runaway jury. I think everyone remembers the O.J. Simpson case. Although some people think that was the correct determination, I would say that most of us today, after many years of reflection, look on that and say that probably was not the correct result. That's rare. Juries rarely do that. And by the way, that jury did that because there were a lot of environmental issues going on at that time with race relations. Very unique situation in Los Angeles. The police had all kinds of issues. So this jury is probably going to get this right. And if I had to handicap this, I think that there's probably a 90% chance they come back against Tom Girardi.
And there is a difference between being unethical, violating the ethical rules versus being criminal. And you can imagine that if you have somebody who, they did something not entirely right, and then they got, found out, but they felt bad about it. They apologized for it. They still got disciplined under the ethical rules. That may not be criminal, but you're talking about somebody here who had a pattern over 10 years of stealing substantial amounts of money. I mean, this goes far beyond any mere ethical violation in my mind. And do you think it would have been better for Girardi to get up on the stand and at least admit some culpability, at least say, look, mistakes were made. I didn't run the accounting as good as I should have. I trusted somebody who I shouldn't have trusted and came in. I thought everything was going well. Apparently it wasn't. I kind of feel like that would have been a better presentation for Tom Girardi to make versus what he did, which is get up on the stand and said, I did absolutely nothing wrong. Every client got every penny. It just seems very unbelievable. What do you think your impression would have been if he had been a little bit more hat in hand or admitted culpability?
It would have been better, Keith, if he would have admitted something. They've done studies to show that doctors who accidentally harm a patient, they don't do it intentionally, it's accidental. When the doctor comes and apologizes to the patient, even during the pendency of a lawsuit, for whatever reason, the juries give less money. And that's because I think somebody's taking responsibility for their actions. And Mr. Girardi here has no legacy. He will always go down in history as a horrible individual, in my mind. He'll go into the category of lawyers who stole from their clients, stole from widows and orphans, when yet he was supposed to be the one standing up for them and fighting for them and getting recoveries for them. So his legacy is already over. Wouldn't it have been nice if he got on the stand and said, as I've sat here during this trial, I've seen all the pain and hardship I've caused people, and I want to apologize for that. I mean, just that alone. And then talk a little bit about, hey, this was an overwhelming situation. I had people asking me to withhold money. I was trying to do my best. Well, now you're going to get a sympathetic ear maybe from the jury. But human nature is to defend yourself. It's a survival instinct. And I think Tom Girardi's going to go down swinging, and I think it's a bad look.
Yeah, I agree. So it's going to be very interesting to see, number one, what the closing arguments are going to be, but secondly, to see what the jury ultimately is going to decide here. It's not looking good for Tom Girardi from my perspective and all the evidence that we've seen. I think a guilty verdict is very likely here, but you never know. Stranger things could happen. And even if it's not a not guilty, it could also be a hung jury. There could be one or two people who are just holdouts and, for whatever reason, they're just not willing to convict. So we'll have to see what happens.
I'd be surprised. That could happen. I'd be surprised. I mean, widows and orphans were hurt here.
Right.
And one thing we all in America, in a divided America, can agree on is we don't hurt widows and orphans. We don't hurt sympathetic people.
Or burn victims.
Especially when we're the one. It's almost like the firefighter coming to put the fire out and they add fuel to the fire. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is to save people. Their purpose is to help people. And that's what they obligate themselves to do when they become firefighters. Tom Girardi obligated himself to helping people. In fact, he even testified that he would, as a trial lawyer, plaintiff's trial lawyer, he wanted to help people. That may have been true at the time, but he ultimately took advantage of the people that he was supposed to help. That's despicable conduct. And I think that ultimately the jury is going to say, we're going to hold you accountable for that.
Okay, well, we will find out. We are racing towards a verdict. The trial is almost over, so stay tuned for our next update on the Tom Girardi trial.